Joining us now from Maryland is WTOP sports anchor Rob Woodfork. And Rob, baseball is back, or is it?
That's a great question, Del. It's supposed to come back this week. We're supposed to see the open of camps. We're supposed to see a regular season played in some way, shape, or form at the end of July, either the 23rd or the 24th. Personally, and this is going to sound crazy coming from a sportscaster, I'm sure, sports has no business being played in 2020. There are much bigger things happening right now. There are much bigger things that we need to focus our attention on. And just logistically, how you try to play a baseball or basketball or any season, whether you try to play them in the home stadiums or whether you try to contain everybody in a bubble somewhere, it just doesn't make sense. And baseball, with the plan that they released last week, everything that they've laid out, there doesn't appear to be a solid contingency if you have a situation where a team, an entire team, or close to an entire team, or an entire position for that matter. I mean, let's take the Nationals, for example. If their starting pitching rotation all gets COVID-19, that's a competitive disadvantage you can't just sort of, brush aside. So I just don't know how you try to play sports and try to play in the future when we don't even know what's going on in 2 weeks, let alone 2 months, and try to plan a multi-billion-dollar campaign like a sporting event, a season full of games.
To be clear, it's not going to look like baseball as we know it. No spitting, no chewing tobacco. You can't high five each other. I guess you have to do an air five.
Yeah.
But everything is going to be different. Tell me what the rules are.
Well, that's you touched on many of them. Guys can't chew sunflower seeds. Guys can't spit. I mean, you and I have watched enough baseball in our lives. How are you going to legislate that out? Those are things that are lifelong habits for these players. And then on top of that, these are guys that are very superstitious. So you stop doing that, and then you go through a hitting slump, or you give up a home run as a pitcher. So that
I got to start spitting again because I can't hit.
Right. Well, there's that. So, yeah, I mean, all of that is obviously that's something that has to be put in the bylines and so forth. But I don't know how you legislate that when that's something that's happened. I don't know how you just stop doing that. And that's the other thing. This requires players to be cognizant of COVID-19 and of all of these things that don't pertain to playing the game. When you play a game at that level, it requires a level of concentration and a level of focus that a lot of people can't necessarily relate to. So to be able to harness, all of that, and at the same time be cognizant of these things to protect your health, that's a lot to ask for a professional player.
I'm curious, a lot of the players are saying that they don't necessarily want to come back because they're worried about not only their health, but we forget these are young athletes with young families, and they say, I don't want to infect my young children.
Exactly. And I think that's the underrated aspect of this, because I feel like we've been conditioned in our minds to think of these athletes as like avatars. But these are real life people with wives and children. I think Bryce Harper is a fine example, because he's got a pregnant wife right now. So you're supposed to tell me that he's got to stay away from his family at a very crucial juncture in life, both for the wife and the child, just so he can play a game? I mean, that's a really tough ask. And in addition to the health aspect, there's a social aspect. I mean, just like the NBA, where they're talking about just putting everybody in a bubble down in Florida, which, by the way, is one of the worst states in the country right now as it pertains to this pandemic. Great place to pick. So, taking people away from their families, taking people away from their routines, and most importantly, just in my estimation anyway, unnecessarily risking the health of people just to get billionaires to earn as much of their money as they can.
Rob, before I let you go, can you guarantee that the Oregon players will be back in the ballpark? I mean, what would baseball be without the seventh inning stretch, without the Oregon player, the dun, 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 dun?
I mean, that's a pretty lonely position anyway. Isn't he off in a corner by himself anyway? Socially, he should be able to come back to work. But that also calls to mind another issue with this whole thing. I mean, we talk about the multi-million-dollar athletes and some of the, coaches and managers and so forth, but there are staff members who make a fraction of what these, the big name players make. And for not a lot of money, but a lot more risk, they're being asked to come back to work and be a part of a restart. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, obviously. I just personally wish that money wasn't at the forefront of all of it.
And final question, and for you, this is personal, but how do you cover a team that is going to be quarantined and practicing social distancing? You're not going to be in a crowded press box anymore either.
No, and that's another aspect of that. Some of the restarts, as I understand it, I mean, even some of the play-by-play voices of some of these teams aren't going to be traveling with the teams. With the restart down in Orlando, I mean, the play-by-play guys are going to be separate and apart from the team, whereas normally they travel with the team. They're on the planes, they're in the locker room, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a pretty difficult set of circumstances to try and juggle that.
Off the table altogether, you think, or you think that there will be a football season?
It's hard to predict. And they've already lost so much of the off-season work. They're talking about starting training camp as normal. I just think the NFL's approach to this is one where they're just staunchly, looking down and just looking toward a season. I don't know how you can make that call. I'm not as confident in that as the league is. We'll put it that way.
WTOP sports anchor Rob Woodfork, which is CBS Radio here in the nation's capital. Rob, as always, thanks for being with us this morning.
Always a pleasure, Del.
See you soon.